The villagers of Kazitani said that Ren had lost her voice on the night of the Great Fire, when the warlord's men burned her family home with everyone inside. Only Ren had survived, stumbling from the ashes at dawn, her eyes hollow, her throat sealed by smoke and grief. For 8 years not a word had passed her lips, not a whisper, not a laugh, not a cry, which was exactly as she intended. Autumn winds scattered red maple leaves across the wooden walkway as Ren swept the entrance to the village tea house. Her movements were practiced and efficient, the broom an extension of her slender arms. At 25, she was neither young maiden nor married woman, existing in that undefined space that made her invisible to most. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her indigo work clothes clean but unremarkable. Only her eyes might have drawn attention, deep brown with flecks of amber, alert and observant, but she kept them downcast, as befitted her station as a servant of Madame Kiku's tea house. The riders appeared without warning, 3 samurai on horseback, dust from the road clinging to their armor. 2 wore the red and black colors of Lord Isao, the daimyo whose castle overlooked the valley. The 3rd wore no lord's colors, his armor weathered from travel, his face half hidden beneath the wide brim of a straw hat. Ren continued sweeping, her rhythm unbroken, though her gaze darted upward briefly. Something about the 3rd rider made her pulse quicken, a vigilance in his posture perhaps, or the way his hand rested near his sword hilt, even as his companions relaxed in their saddles. "Water for our horses," the lead rider called, not bothering with pleasantries. "And sake for ourselves." Ren bowed deeply but made no verbal response. The riders dismounted, tying their horses to the post where she had been sweeping. The nameless samurai moved with a slight limp, she noticed, favoring his left leg as he followed the others into the tea house. "Ah, honored guests." Madame Kiku's voice floated from inside, practiced and welcoming. "Please, come in, come in. Ren, water for the horses, quickly." Ren hurried to obey, filling buckets at the well and bringing them to the tired animals. As she worked, she kept her ears tuned to the conversation drifting through the open doors. "Tracking bandits in the eastern foothills," one of Lord Isao's men was saying. 3 villages raided in as many months. The same group? This voice was new, deeper, with an accent Ren couldn't place. The 3rd samurai, she guessed. "We believe so. They leave no survivors to identify them. Yet you track them nonetheless." "Lord Isao is determined to protect his people," the 1st samurai replied, a note of pride in his voice. "We follow what traces they leave, broken branches, campfire ashes, occasionally a dropped item." "And you?" Madame Kiku's voice curious. "You do not wear Lord Isao's colors, Samurai-san." A pause. "I serve no lord currently. My name is Takashi Hideyoshi." Ren nearly dropped the water bucket. Her hands trembled as she steadied it, keeping her back to the tea house as she fought to control her breathing. That name. After 8 years of silence, of hiding, of making herself unremarkable, that name had found its way to her doorstep. A Ronin, then. One of the Lord's samurai, his tone carrying a subtle disdain. "If you wish to call me so." The deep voice, Hideyoshi's voice, held no offense. "I have been traveling, studying techniques of different sword masters." "And your travels bring you to our humble village?" Madame Kiku asked. "I go where the road leads, though I admit I seek information as well as rest." "What information could our small village provide to a master swordsman?" "I search for someone," Hideyoshi said. "A family that once lived in these parts, the Miyamoto family." The water bucket slipped from Ren's fingers, splashing across the dusty ground. Inside, the conversation halted. She scrambled to right the bucket, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain they could hear it from inside. "Clumsy girl," Madame Kiku's voice called out, apologetic. "My servant, Ren. She is mute, poor thing, and sometimes the affliction makes her hands unreliable as well." Laughter from the Lord's samurai. Ren kept her head bowed, her hands still shaking as she refilled the bucket. "The Miyamoto family," Madame Kiku continued. "I'm afraid they are gone, Samurai-san. Their estate burned many years ago. A terrible tragedy. The entire family was lost." "The entire family?" Hideyoshi's voice carried a note of intensity that made Ren's skin prickle. "So it was believed. Why do you ask about them? Were you acquainted?" I owed them a debt, he said simply, one I had hoped to repay. If you found yourself drawn into this world of secrets and samurai, consider sharing this tale with a friend who appreciates stories where silence speaks louder than words. Ren finished watering the horses and slipped around to the back of the tea house. Through the small window of the kitchen, she could see the 3 samurai seated at the low table, Madame Kiku serving them sake with practiced grace. Takashi Hideyoshi had removed his hat, revealing a face that belonged to a man in his mid-30s, weather-lined but handsome in a severe way. His hair was pulled back in the traditional top knot, though strands had escaped to frame a strong jawline. A thin scar traced the line of his right cheekbone, standing out white against sun-darkened skin. He looked nothing like the young samurai she remembered from her childhood, the one who had visited their home, who had trained with her father, who had left with promises to return. But then, she likely looked nothing like the girl he had known either. 8 years changed many things. "You there, girl," one of Lord Isao's samurai was calling from inside. "More sake." Ren composed herself, straightening her kimono and smoothing her features into the blank mask she had perfected over the years. She entered with her head bowed, moving silently to fetch the sake flask. As she knelt to pour, she felt Hideyoshi's gaze upon her. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on the precise angle of the flask, the careful measure of each cup. "How long has she served you?" Hideyoshi asked Madame Kiku, though his eyes never left Ren. "The girl." 8 years this autumn," the older woman replied. "She came to me after the Great Fire. No family, no voice, but a willingness to work. She's a good girl, if simple." Ren continued her task, moving to fill Hideyoshi's cup last. As she poured, his fingers brushed hers. Deliberately, she was certain. She froze, sake still streaming into the cup, her eyes fixed on their touching hands. "Careful, girl," he murmured. "The cup overflows." She jerked back, bowing in apology as sake spilled across the table. Madame Kiku clucked in disapproval, sending Ren for cloths to clean the mess. When she returned, the conversation had shifted to the bandits once more. "They'll strike again soon," Lord Isao's senior samurai was saying. "The pattern suggests they target villages just before the harvest, when storehouses are full." "Your village would make a tempting target," Hideyoshi observed, addressing Madame Kiku. "Prosperous, remote, with few defenses." The tea-house owner paled slightly. "Surely Lord Isao's patrols will protect us." The samurai exchanged glances. "We patrol as we can, but our forces are stretched thin across the province. Perhaps," Hideyoshi said carefully, "I might linger here a few days. An extra sword could prove useful, should trouble arise." Relief washed over Madame Kiku's face. "You would be most welcome, Samurai-san. I have a small room above the tea-house, humble accommodations, but clean and private." "Your generosity honors me," Hideyoshi replied with a slight bow. Ren kept her expression neutral as she wiped the spilled sake, but inside, her mind raced. Hideyoshi staying here, under the same roof, it was too dangerous. After 8 years of careful silence, of burying her true self so deeply she sometimes forgot who she had been, discovery seemed suddenly, terrifyingly possible. Later that evening, after the Lord Samurai had departed to continue their patrol and the tea-house had closed for the night, Ren prepared the guest room as Madame Kiku had instructed. She laid out fresh sleeping mats, filled the water basin, and placed a small vase of autumn leaves in the alcove. Simple touches of hospitality for their unexpected guest. She was arranging the bedding when a floorboard creaked behind her. She turned to find Hideyoshi standing in the doorway, watching her with unreadable eyes. "Thank you for your care," he said quietly. Ren bowed in acknowledgement, keeping her gaze fixed on the tatami mats. "They say you cannot speak," he continued. "An injury, or perhaps a choice." She stiffened slightly but gave no other reaction, continuing her work with practiced movements. Hideyoshi stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. He moved differently now that they were alone, more fluid, without the limp he had affected earlier. A deception, she realized, but why? "The Miyamoto family," he said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry beyond the room. "Did you know them, Ren-san?" She shook her head, a simple denial. "Strange," he murmured. "You reacted when I mentioned their name. The water bucket. A coincidence, perhaps." Ren kept her face expressionless, though her heart pounded so violently she feared he might hear it. She gestured to the prepared room with a small bow, indicating her work was complete, then turned to leave. His hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Miyamoto Akiko," he said softly. The name, her real name, sent a shock through her system. 8 years since anyone had spoken it aloud. 8 years of being just Ren, the mute servant girl. She kept her back to him, not trusting her face to hide her reaction. "That was the daughter's name," Hideyoshi continued, releasing her wrist. "She would be about your age now. They said the family perished in the fire, but bodies burned beyond recognition can be difficult to identify with certainty, especially if one wished to disappear." Ren turned slowly, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. His eyes were dark and intent, searching her face for confirmation of his suspicions. "I knew her father," he said. "Miyamoto Takeshi was my swordmaster many years ago. I owed him my life twice over. When I heard of the fire, I was across the sea in Korea. By the time I returned, nothing remained but ashes and rumors." She held his gaze steadily now, neither confirming nor denying. "If you were her," he said carefully, "if Miyamoto Akiko somehow survived that night, I would tell her that I have spent 8 years searching, that I have questions about the fire that claimed her family, that I believe it was no accident." He paused. "And I would promise her my protection, should she choose to trust me with her truth." Ren, Akiko, felt the weight of 8 years of silence pressing down upon her. Words crowded her throat, desperate for release. But caution held them back. Trust had cost her everything once before. She bowed once more, backing toward the door. Hideyoshi made no move to stop her this time, merely watching as she retreated. "I will stay 3 days," he said, as she reached the threshold. "After that, I continue my journey. Should anyone wish to speak with me before then, I would listen without judgment." She slipped away without response, her mind in turmoil. In her small room at the back of the tea house, she sat awake long into the night, staring at the sliver of moon visible through her window. Takashi Hideyoshi, her father's most promising student, the young samurai who had shown such kindness to the swordmaster's awkward daughter. She had believed him dead as well, another victim of whatever conspiracy had destroyed her family. Now he was here, sleeping under the same roof, asking questions that could shatter the fragile safety she had built for herself. If she spoke to him, broke her 8 years of protective silence, what would follow? Justice? Revenge? Or merely fresh danger? Sleep eluded her until the first birds began their dawn chorus outside her window. By then, she had made no decision except the one that had kept her alive thus far. Remain silent, remain watchful, remain Ren for at least 1 day more. Morning brought a heavy mist that clung to the village like a shroud. Ren rose early, as always, stoking the kitchen fire and preparing tea for Madame Kiku. The older woman emerged from her chambers yawning, her silver-streaked hair not yet arranged in its usual immaculate style. "Is our guest awake?" she asked, accepting the tea with a nod of thanks. Ren shook her head. "Good. Let him rest. A Ronin's life cannot be easy." Madame Kiku sipped her tea thoughtfully. "A handsome man, though, isn't he? Those eyes see much." She glanced at Ren with sudden sharpness. "He watched you yesterday. Did he trouble you?" Ren shook her head again, more emphatically this time. "Good. Men of his station sometimes forget themselves with servant girls. If he should make improper advances, you come directly to me, understand?" Ren nodded, touched by the older woman's concern. Madame Kiku had been kind to her these 8 years, never prying into her past, accepting her silence as a tragedy rather than a deception. The guilt of lying to her benefactor was yet another burden Ren carried. The morning progressed as usual. Regular customers came for tea and rice balls, village gossip flowing as freely as the green tea. Several visitors mentioned the samurai's presence with curious glances toward the upper floor, but he remained in his room, unseen. It was nearly midday when Hideyoshi finally appeared, descending the stairs with the quiet grace that marked him as a swordsman, even without his armor. He had dressed simply in dark hakama and a plain kimono, his swords the only indication of his rank. "Good morning," Madame Kiku greeted him cheerfully. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," he replied with a respectful bow. "Your hospitality is most appreciated." "Nonsense. Any man willing to help protect our village is welcome here. Ren will bring you breakfast." As Ren served him rice, grilled fish, and pickled vegetables, she could feel his eyes following her movements. She maintained her careful blankness, her practiced invisibility, though it took all her concentration. "I thought I might familiarize myself with the village today," Hideyoshi said between bites. "Learn its layout, assess its vulnerabilities should bandits come." "A wise precaution," Madame Kiku agreed. "Ren knows every path and building in Kazutani. She could show you around, save you time." Panic fluttered in Ren's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "That would be most helpful," Hideyoshi said, a hint of something, amusement, challenge, in his voice. "If she can be spared from her duties, of course. The midday rush is over, and I can manage until evening." Madame Kiku waved a dismissive hand. "Ren, fetch your cloak and show our guest the village." Trapped, Ren could only bow in acquiescence. Minutes later, she found herself walking beside Takashi Hideyoshi through the misty streets of Kazutani, hyper-aware of his tall presence beside her. "Where shall we begin?" he asked pleasantly, as if they were merely new acquaintances on a casual stroll. Ren pointed toward the village center, where the communal bell tower stood. It offered a view of the entire settlement and would allow him to understand its layout quickly, and she hoped end this dangerous outing sooner. They walked in silence for several minutes, Ren keeping a careful distance between them. Villagers nodded respectfully as they passed, curiosity in their eyes at the sight of the mute tea-house girl accompanying the stranger. "You've built a life here," Hideyoshi observed quietly. 8 years is a long time. I understand why breaking your silence would be difficult." Ren kept her eyes forward, giving no indication she heard his words. "The men who burned your family's estate that night were mercenaries," he continued, his voice so low it barely carried to her ears. "Hired by someone with considerable resources. I've traced them across 3 provinces, but the trail grows cold at each turn. Someone powerful protects them, and himself." A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air ran through her. She had suspected as much, had known her family's death was no accident, but hearing it confirmed made her chest tighten painfully. "If you're enjoying this tale of hidden truths and patient justice, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories where courage wears many disguises." "Your father was a great man," Hideyoshi said as they climbed the steps to the bell tower. "Honorable, skilled, respected. But he also kept secrets. In the months before his death, he sent me a letter." He paused as they reached the top of the tower. "He wrote that he had discovered something that could topple a mountain. Those were his exact words." Ren gripped the wooden railing, staring out at the village below without seeing it. Her father's cryptic phrases, she remembered how he spoke in poetry and metaphor, often to her mother's fond exasperation. "I believe someone feared what your father knew," Hideyoshi continued. "Someone who would rather commit murder than allow that knowledge to spread." She turned to him then, searching his face. Why tell her this? What did he expect her to do with this information? She was no longer the daughter of a respected swordmaster. She was Ren, the mute servant, powerless, voiceless, safe only in her insignificance. As if reading her thoughts, Hideyoshi said, "I do not ask you to speak if silence protects you. But know that I continue your father's work, seeking the truth he died for. And should you ever wish to join that search, you need only say a single word to me." His dark eyes held hers. Just one. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. In another life, she might have trusted this man without hesitation. In another life, she might have. A sudden commotion from the village entrance broke the tension. Shouts and the thunder of hooves echoed through the misty air. From their elevated position, they could see riders entering the village at speed. 5 men on horseback, armed with bows and swords, their faces hidden behind cloth masks. "Bandits!" Hideyoshi hissed, his hand flying to his sword hilt. Earlier than expected. He turned to Ren. "Stay here, keep out of sight." Before she could react, he was racing down the tower steps, drawing his katana as he ran toward the disturbance. Ren watched from above, as villagers scattered before the mounted men, who were already breaking into storehouses, loading bags of rice onto their horses. Two of the riders noticed Hideyoshi approaching and wheeled to face him, drawing their own weapons. Even from a distance, Ren could see the difference in skill immediately. Hideyoshi moved like flowing water, his blade catching the weak autumn sunlight as it arced through the air. The first bandit fell from his horse with a cry, clutching his shoulder. The second pressed his attack more cautiously, circling Hideyoshi on horseback, looking for an opening. Meanwhile, the other three bandits continued their raid, threatening villagers who tried to protect their goods. Ren saw Madame Kiku emerge from the tea house, shouting at a bandit who was dragging a struggling young woman toward his horse. Without conscious thought, Ren was moving, descending the tower steps as rapidly as she dared. Hideyoshi had told her to stay hidden, but she couldn't watch idly as the village that had sheltered her was attacked. She might not have a samurai's training, but she knew Kazutani's layout intimately, its hidden paths, its shortcuts, its vulnerabilities, and she knew where the village headman kept the old signal horn, unused for years but still functional. If sounded, it would alert the nearest patrol of Lord Issao's samurai, who had mentioned just yesterday they would be in the area. Keeping to shadows and narrow alleys, Ren made her way toward the headman's house. The commotion in the village center provided cover for her movements. Most of the bandits were focused on gathering supplies or dealing with Hideyoshi, who was now fighting two opponents simultaneously, his blade a blur of deadly precision. The headman's house stood empty, its occupants likely fled or hiding. Ren slipped inside, making directly for the wooden chest where ceremonial items were stored. The horn lay wrapped in silk, its surface etched with protective symbols. She grabbed it and ran to the rear of the house, climbing quickly to the rooftop platform where announcements were sometimes made on festival days. From this vantage, she could see the full chaos below. Hideyoshi had disabled one more bandit, but was now facing the leader, a larger man whose sword technique actually seemed to match the Ronin's skill. The remaining two bandits continued loading supplies, occasionally firing arrows to keep villagers at bay. Ren raised the horn to her lips and blew with all her might. The deep, resonant tone echoed across the valley, startling birds from trees and causing both bandits and villagers to pause momentarily in shock. She continued blowing in the pattern that signaled danger. 3 long blasts. 3 short, 3 long. The bandit leader looked up, locating her on the rooftop immediately. With a shout to his men, he broke away from his fight with Hideyoshi and galloped toward the headman's house, clearly intent on stopping her signal. Ren kept blowing even as fear coursed through her. 3 long blasts, 3 short, 3 long. The patrol would hear, would come, if she could just maintain the signal long enough. The bandit reached the building, leaping from his horse and scaling the exterior ladder with frightening speed. Ren backed away, still clutching the horn, her eyes darting for an escape route. The roof offered none. As the masked man crested the rooftop, sword drawn, Ren made a split-second decision. She hurled the horn directly at his face with all her strength, then dove past him toward the ladder. The heavy instrument struck true, catching him in the forehead with a dull thud. He staggered backward, cursing viciously, but recovered quickly enough to grab her ankle as she scrambled for the ladder. Ren kicked frantically, connecting with his wrist. His grip loosened momentarily, but not enough for her to break free. He hauled her backward, flipping her onto her back, his sword raised for a killing blow. "Troublesome village rat," he snarled through his mask. The sword descended and met another blade in midair with a resounding clash of steel. Hideyoshi stood on the rooftop, having scaled the opposite side of the building while the bandit was distracted. His face was spattered with blood, not his own, and his eyes burned with cold fury. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. The bandit released Ren's ankle, turning to face this new threat. "The masterless dog," he sneered. "Still playing hero?" Something in the exchange made Ren freeze. They knew each other. This was no random encounter. "Take your men and go," Hideyoshi said, circling slowly to place himself between Ren and the bandit. "The patrol is coming. You've lost today's prize." "Have I?" The bandit's eyes flicked to Ren, then back to Hideyoshi. "Perhaps I've found a better one, the ghost of Miyamoto, living as a mute servant. Lord Kaito would pay handsomely for that information. Hideyoshi's expression didn't change, but Ren saw his grip tighten on his sword. Lord Kaito is dead. His son isn't. The bandit lunged suddenly, his blade aiming not for Hideyoshi but for Ren. What followed happened so quickly that Ren would later struggle to reconstruct the sequence. Hideyoshi moved like lightning, his sword meeting the bandit's with such force that the inferior blade cracked. A second strike knocked the damaged weapon from the bandit's hand. A third opened a deep gash across his chest. The bandit staggered backward, clutching his wound, hatred blazing in his eyes. "She'll never be safe," he gasped. "The son wants the Miyamoto secrets even more than the father did. He'll find her eventually." "Not while I draw breath," Hideyoshi replied coldly. With a final glare of defiance, the bandit leader turned and flung himself from the rooftop. He landed hard but managed to reach his horse, mounting with visible effort. A shout to his remaining men, and the bandits retreated as quickly as they had come, leaving behind their wounded comrade and a fraction of their intended spoils. As the dust settled, Hideyoshi turned to Ren, his eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still trembling with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said, sheathing his sword. "Possibly both." The distant sound of galloping horses reached them, the patrol responding to her horn signal. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by fresh anxiety. The bandit had recognized her, had spoken her family name aloud, had mentioned Lord Kaito, a name she had spent 8 years trying to forget. Her secret was unraveling thread by thread, and with each revelation, the fragile safety she had built for herself frayed further. Hideyoshi seemed to read her thoughts. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Tonight, after the village settles." He offered his hand to help her rise. "Until then, you remain Ren, the mute servant girl. I will say nothing to contradict that story." She accepted his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. His palm was calloused but warm against hers, his grip secure. For the first time in 8 years, Akiko felt the faintest whisper of something she had almost forgotten: trust. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity. Lord Isao's samurai arrived shortly after the bandits fled, taking statements from villagers and examining the wounded bandit left behind. The captive refused to speak, maintaining stubborn silence even under questioning. The irony was not lost on Ren. Hideyoshi gave his account of the attack to the patrol leader, describing himself simply as a ronin, passing through who had offered his sword in the village's defense. If he knew more about the bandits, if he recognized their leader as he clearly had, he kept that information to himself. The village headman organized repairs to damaged buildings, while Madame Kiku opened the tea house to anyone needing food or comfort. Ren worked alongside her, serving tea and meals, binding minor injuries, all while keenly aware of Hideyoshi's presence nearby. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the crowded room, a current of unspoken understanding passing between them. It was well past midnight when the tea house finally emptied. The patrol had departed, promising to return with reinforcements to guard the village for the next several days. The wounded and frightened had been tended to and sent home. Only Madame Kiku, Ren, and Hideyoshi remained, clearing away cups and bowls by lamplight. "Such a day," Madame Kiku sighed, rubbing her lower back. "Thank the gods you were here, Hideyoshi-san. Without your sword arm, who knows what might have happened." "The village defended itself admirably," he replied, "especially this one." He nodded toward Ren. Her quick thinking with the signal horn brought the patrol in time. Madame Kiku beamed proudly. "Our Ren is resourceful, despite her affliction. She's been a blessing to this house." Guilt twisted in Ren's stomach at the genuine affection in the older woman's voice. 8 years of deception, 8 years of allowing this kind soul to believe a lie. "You must be exhausted," Hideyoshi said to Madame Kiku. "Please allow me to finish clearing while you rest. It's the least I can do for your hospitality." "Nonsense. You fought bandits today. You should be the one resting." But the tea house owner couldn't quite stifle her yawn. "I insist," Hideyoshi said firmly. "Ren will help me and then she too can retire." Too tired to argue further, Madame Kiku finally agreed, shuffling off to her chambers with another grateful bow to the ronin. When her door slid shut, Silence fell over the tea house, broken only by the soft clink of pottery as Ren continued gathering dishes. "We can speak safely now," Hideyoshi said quietly, moving to secure the front entrance. "No one will disturb us." Ren set down the tray she was holding, her hands suddenly unsteady. 8 years of silence stretched before her like an unbreachable chasm. Could she truly cross it now? And what waited on the other side? "I understand your hesitation," Hideyoshi said, returning to stand a respectful distance from her. "For 8 years, silence has been your shield. Breaking it now must feel like laying down your only weapon." She nodded slowly, grateful for his perception. "The bandit leader recognized you," he continued, "and he mentioned Lord Kaito's son. This changes matters. You are no longer safe here, silence or no." The truth of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had known this day might come, had prepared for it in small ways over the years, keeping a bundle of essential items hidden beneath a floorboard in her room, memorizing escape routes from the village, saving what few coins Madame Kiku gave her for her service. "I have been hunting the men responsible for your family's murder for 8 years, Hideyoshi said. "Following trails gone cold, gathering fragments of information, searching for witnesses, all the while believing you had died with your parents." His voice softened. "Finding you alive. It changes everything, Akiko-san." The sound of her true name, spoken with such gentle respect, broke something free inside her. Tears she had not allowed herself for 8 years welled in her eyes, spilling silently down her cheeks. Hideyoshi took a step toward her, then stopped himself, respecting her space. "I don't ask you to trust me completely. Not yet. But I made a vow to your father to protect his family, and I failed once. I won't fail again." Ren, Akiko, raised her eyes to his, reading the sincerity in his gaze. For 8 years, she had carried her burden alone, looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. The weight of it had bent her nearly to breaking. "Lord!" The word emerged as a croak, her vocal cords stiff from disuse. She swallowed painfully and tried again. "Lord Kaito wanted my father's manuscript." Hideyoshi's eyes widened at the sound of her voice, rough as stone grinding against stone, but unmistakably feminine, unmistakably human. "The text on imperial sword techniques," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one rumored to contain the secret forms of the royal guard." She nodded, each word easier than the last, as her throat remembered its purpose. "Father refused to surrender it, said it wasn't his to give, that its secrets belonged to the imperial line alone. So Kaito burned your home, with your family inside." Hideyoshi's face darkened with controlled anger. "But you escaped." Through the hidden passage in the dojo floor. Her voice was gaining strength now, though still raspy from years of silence. "Father always insisted we practice using it even in darkness. I was reading in the dojo when I smelled the smoke. By the time I reached the main house..." She faltered, the memory still too painful to articulate fully. "You couldn't save them," Hideyoshi finished gently. "So you ran, changed your identity, became Ren." "I had nothing. No proof of Kaito's treachery. No allies powerful enough to stand against him. Only my life, which wouldn't have lasted a day if he knew I survived." She wiped away her tears with trembling fingers. "So I became no one, a mute servant, invisible." "A wise strategy," Hideyoshi acknowledged. "But now Lord Kaito's son has taken up his father's quest, and after today, word may spread that a Miyamoto survived." The reality of her situation settled like a stone in her stomach. "I must leave Kazutani," she said, the thought bringing fresh pain. This village had become her home, Madame Kiku the closest thing to family she had left. "Yes," Hideyoshi agreed, "but not alone." He knelt suddenly before her, assuming the formal posture of a samurai pledging service. "Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of my honored teacher, I offer you my sword and my life. Let me help you reclaim your birthright and bring justice to those who destroyed your family." If this tale of rediscovered courage and faithful promises speaks to you, please consider subscribing for more stories of honor reclaimed and silence broken. Akiko stared at the man kneeling before her, this samurai who had searched for 8 years, who had never abandoned his duty to her family, even when all hope seemed lost. Something long dormant stirred within her, not just trust, but purpose. "Rise, Takashi Hideyoshi," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I accept your service, though I have nothing to offer in return." "You offer justice," he replied, standing. "For your father, for your family, that is payment enough." A question that had lingered in her mind surfaced. "How did you find me, after all these years?" "Fortune favored me," he admitted. 3 months ago, I encountered a merchant who traded in this region. He mentioned a mute tea-house girl who had appeared shortly after the Miyamoto tragedy. The timing seemed significant, so I came to see for myself. A small smile touched his lips. "Though I confess I wasn't certain until I saw your reaction to your family name." 8 years of caution, undone in an instant, she murmured ruefully. "The heart remembers what the mind instructs it to forget," Hideyoshi said. "But now we must focus on the future. We should leave before dawn, while the village sleeps." "And go where?" Uncertainty colored her newly recovered voice. "First, to retrieve something I believe you still possess." His eyes held a question. "The manuscript your father died protecting. Did it survive the fire?" Akiko hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It never left the dojo. Father kept it beneath the 7th tatami from the eastern wall. I took it with me when I escaped." She glanced toward her small room at the back of the tea house. "It's hidden beneath my floor, along with a few items I salvaged that night." Relief washed over Hideyoshi's features. Then all was not lost. "With the manuscript as evidence and your testimony as the surviving Miyamoto heir, we can petition the imperial court directly. Bypass the local lords entirely." "The imperial court?" Alarm shot through her. "I am a tea-house servant. They would never grant me audience." "You are Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of the emperor's former swordmaster," Hideyoshi corrected firmly. "Your father's name still carries weight in certain circles, and I have contacts in the capital who owe me favors." The scope of what he proposed overwhelmed her. After 8 years of hiding, of making herself small and invisible, the thought of stepping into the light, of reclaiming her name and seeking justice at the highest levels of power seemed impossibly daring. Yet what alternative remained? Stay and risk bringing destruction to the village that had sheltered her? Flee alone, always looking over her shoulder? The path Hideyoshi offered was dangerous, but at least it led somewhere beyond mere survival. "I will need to leave Madame Kiku a letter," she said finally. "She deserves an explanation after all her kindness." Hideyoshi nodded. "Write it tonight. We leave before first light." They worked quickly and quietly, gathering only what was essential. From beneath her floor, Akiko retrieved a small bundle wrapped in oiled paper, the manuscript, along with a jade hair ornament that had belonged to her mother and her father's tanto, its blade still sharp after 8 years of hiding. As Hideyoshi secured provisions and prepared the horses he had quietly purchased from a local farmer, Akiko wrote her farewell to Madame Kiku. The brush felt strange in her hand after so long, but the characters flowed more naturally than her spoken words had. She explained her deception as gently as possible, apologized for leaving without a proper goodbye, and thanked the woman who had been her protector and surrogate mother these many years. She left the letter on her neatly folded bedding, along with most of the coins she had saved, a poor repayment for 8 years of kindness, but all she had to offer. Just before dawn, as the eastern sky began to lighten from black to deepest blue, Hideyoshi helped her mount one of the 2 horses, waiting in the sheltered grove behind the tea house. She wore her simplest kimono with a warm cloak over top, her few possessions and the precious manuscript secured in a small pack. "Ready?" Hideyoshi asked softly, mounting his own horse with practiced ease. Akiko cast one last glance at the tea house, at the life she was leaving behind. For 8 years, she had been Ren, safe, silent, invisible. Now she stepped back into a world of danger and uncertainty, reclaiming a name that carried both honor and peril. "Ready," she replied, her voice still rough but growing more confident with each use. They rode out as the first birds began their morning songs, following the narrow forest path that would keep them hidden from the main road. Neither spoke until the village of Kazutani was well behind them, the morning mist obscuring their tracks. "Where do we go first?" Akiko finally asked, breaking the companionable silence. To the mountains north of here, Hideyoshi replied. There's a temple where we can find sanctuary while we plan our next steps. The head monk was also a student of your father's in his youth. He can be trusted completely. And then? Then we gather allies, evidence, build our case against Lord Kaito's son. Hideyoshi's expression hardened. And we train. Your father taught you the sword, did he not? Akiko nodded. Until I was 17, though I haven't held a proper blade since that night. Then we begin again. Your skills will return quickly under guidance. He glanced at her appraisingly. You moved well during the bandit attack. Your instincts remain sound. The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage is not the absence of fear, Hideyoshi said, echoing words she had heard her father speak long ago. It is action in the face of fear. They rode through the morning, staying to forest paths and stream beds where their tracks would be difficult to follow. Hideyoshi seemed to know the terrain intimately, choosing routes that kept them hidden from the occasional traveler on the main roads below. By midday, they had climbed into the foothills, the air growing cooler as they ascended. Akiko's body ached from the unaccustomed activity. 8 years of tea-house work had not prepared her for hours on horseback, but she made no complaint. They stopped to rest in a small clearing beside a mountain stream, allowing the horses to drink, while they shared a simple meal of rice balls and dried fish that Hideyoshi had packed. You should practice speaking, he suggested as they ate. Your voice will strengthen with use. Akiko nodded, swallowing a bite of rice. What shall I say after 8 years of silence? Whatever comes to mind. Tell me about your life in Kazutani, perhaps. So she did, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. She told him about her early days at the tea-house, when every moment had been a battle against the urge to speak. How Madame Kiku had taught her to brew the perfect cup of tea, to arrange flowers for the alcove, to read a customer's mood from the set of their shoulders. How the seasons had passed in a gentle rhythm of village festivals and changing menus, each year blending into the next, until Ren's identity felt more real than Akiko's. Hideyoshi listened attentively, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing her to rediscover the simple pleasure of conversation. By the time they resumed their journey, Akiko's voice had lost some of its raspy edge, though it still tired quickly. What of you? She asked as they began the steeper ascent toward the mountain temple. 8 years is a long time. Where have you been? What have you seen? A shadow crossed Hideyoshi's face. I was across the sea when news of the fire reached me. By the time I returned to Japan, the ashes were cold, and Lord Kaito's men had spread the story that bandits were responsible for the attack. But you knew otherwise. He nodded grimly. Your father had written to me of his concerns about Lord Kaito's interest in the manuscript. When I heard of the fire, I suspected immediately. His hands tightened on the reins. I confronted Kaito directly, accused him to his face. It was unwise. What happened? Akiko asked, noting the grim set of his jaw. He denied everything, of course. Had me arrested for insulting a lord. I would have been executed, but an old friend intervened, arranging for my exile instead. A humorless smile touched his lips. I spent 3 years in the Ryukyu Islands before slipping back into Japan under a different name. Since then, I've been gathering evidence, tracking Kaito's mercenaries, building a network of allies who remember your father with honor. And Lord Kaito himself? The bandit said he was dead. 2 years ago. A riding accident officially, though rumors suggest poison. Hideyoshi's expression darkened. His son Kaito Noboru took his place. By all accounts, he is more ambitious than his father, and less patient. The manuscript your father protected has become something of a legend among certain martial circles, a text containing techniques so powerful they could overthrow the shogunate itself. Is that true? Akiko asked. I never read it. Father forbade anyone but himself to open it. Legends grow in the telling, Hideyoshi replied. But your father believed its contents dangerous enough to die protecting. That much I know with certainty. They rode in thoughtful silence for a time, each absorbed in memories of the man who had connected their lives. As the afternoon sun began its westward descent, Hideyoshi pointed ahead to where the tiled roof of a temple emerged from the surrounding pines. "Kongoji Temple," he said. "Our sanctuary, at least for now." The temple was smaller than Akiko had expected, a modest complex of wooden buildings nestled against the mountainside. Its weathered gates stood open, revealing a stone path that led to the main hall. A few monks in simple grey robes moved about the grounds, tending to gardens or carrying buckets of water. As they approached, an elderly monk looked up from his work, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. Recognition dawned on his lined face, followed by a wide smile. "Hideyoshi-san, you returned sooner than expected." His gaze shifted to Akiko, curiosity evident in his sharp eyes. "Master Genku," Hideyoshi greeted him with a deep bow from horseback. "I bring a guest who requires the temple's protection. May we enter and speak privately?" Of course, of course." The old monk gestured them forward. "Any friend of Hideyoshi's is welcome at Kongoji." They dismounted, younger monks hurrying forward to take their horses. Master Genku led them to a small reception room in the abbot's quarters, instructing a novice to bring tea. When they were seated on cushions around a low table, the old monk studied Akiko with undisguised interest. "There is something familiar about you, young lady," he said. "Have we met before?" Akiko glanced at Hideyoshi, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she spoke her true name aloud for the first time in 8 years. "I am Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of Miyamoto Takeshi." Master Genku's teacup clattered against the table, tea splashing across the polished wood. "Impossible," he whispered. "The Miyamoto family perished in the fire. All of them." "Not all," Hideyoshi said quietly. "Akiko-san escaped. She has been living under a false identity all these years, for her own protection." The old monk's eyes filled with tears. "Takeshi's daughter, alive." He bowed deeply, his forehead touching the floor. "Your father was my teacher, my friend. That his bloodline continues is a blessing I never dared hope for." For the second time that day, Akiko found herself weeping, the emotions of 8 years of suppressed grief and fear finally finding release. Master Genku watched her with compassion, passing a sleeve of his robe for her to dry her tears. "You are safe here, Miyamoto-san," he assured her. "Kongoji has stood apart from political matters for 300 years. Neither lord nor samurai may enter without invitation." "Thank you for your kindness," Akiko said, composing herself. "But I fear we bring danger to your doorstep nonetheless. The son of the man who ordered my family's death now seeks the same treasure his father killed for." Master Genku's expression grew grave. "The manuscript." Hideyoshi nodded. "Akiko has preserved it all these years. We intend to use it and her testimony to bring Lord Kaito's son to justice." "A dangerous path," the old monk murmured, "but perhaps the only one that leads to peace for the spirits of the fallen." He straightened, decision made. "You will stay as long as necessary. We will give you sanctuary and aid in whatever way we can." "We ask only for a quiet place to rest and plan," Hideyoshi said, "and perhaps use of the temple's practice grounds. Akiko-san must regain her sword skills if we are to undertake this journey." "All that and more is yours," Master Genku promised. "But first, rest. You have traveled far today, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As the old monk showed them to separate quarters, simple rooms with sleeping mats, writing desks, and views of the temple gardens, Akiko felt a curious lightness despite the danger that still surrounded them. After 8 years of being no one, of silencing not just her voice but her very identity, she had spoken her name aloud and been recognized. Miyamoto Akiko lived again. That night, she slept more soundly than she had in years. Her dreams filled not with fire and loss, but with memories of her father's dojo, of childhood lessons, of a young samurai named Hideyoshi, who had once made her heart flutter when she was barely more than a girl. Morning brought the gentle sound of temple bells and the soft patter of rain against wooden eaves. Akiko rose with the dawn, dressing in the simple cotton robe that had been left for her, temple clothing clean and practical. Her tea-house garments had been taken for washing, Master Genku had explained the night before, but would be returned to her mended and clean. In the covered walkway outside her room, she found Hideyoshi waiting, similarly dressed in temple robes. For a moment, she was struck by how different he looked without his swords, younger somehow, less burdened. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in years," she admitted, her voice coming more naturally now. "This place feels protected." "It is in more ways than one." He gestured for her to walk with him. Master Genku maintains good relations with the local lords, but the temple's true security lies in its reputation for neutrality. All are welcome here, samurai, merchant, farmer, outcast. None may bring their conflicts within these walls. They walked along the covered path that encircled the temple complex, the rain creating a curtain of silver beyond the eaves. The air smelled of wet pine and incense, a combination Akiko found unexpectedly comforting. "We should begin your training today," Hideyoshi said as they walked. "Your body remembers more than you might think, but muscles grow weak with disuse." Akiko nodded, both eager and apprehensive. "My father believed women should know how to defend themselves, uncommon as that view might be. He trained me alongside the male students until I was 17. "I remember," Hideyoshi said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You were formidable even then, quick and precise, if somewhat impulsive." She glanced at him in surprise. "You remember me from your time at the dojo?" A slight flush colored his cheeks. "Of course. You were the master's daughter, and a skilled student in your own right." There seemed to be something more behind his words, but before she could question him further, they rounded a corner to find Master Genku waiting in a covered practice area at the rear of the temple grounds. Weapons racks lined one wall, wooden training swords of various sizes and weights. Right on time, as the old monk greeted them. "I thought perhaps we might begin with a small assessment of what Miyamoto-san remembers." "Please call me Akiko," she requested. "After 8 years of hiding my name, I would hear it spoken by friends." Master Genku smiled warmly. "Akiko-san, then. Please select a bokken that feels comfortable to your hand." She approached the weapons rack with a strange mixture of reverence and trepidation. How long since she had held a sword of any kind? Yet as her fingers closed around the smooth wooden hilt of a practice sword, something within her stirred. Muscle memory, perhaps, or the echo of her father's voice instructing her in proper grip. She tested the weight of several, before selecting one that felt balanced in her hand. Not too heavy, not too light. She turned to face the two men, holding the bokken in the ready position as naturally as if she had practiced daily for the past 8 years. "The body remembers," Master Genku said approvingly. "Now let us see what else it recalls. Hideyoshi-san, if you would." Hideyoshi selected his own practice sword and moved to face her across the training area, assuming the formal stance that began all practice matches. Akiko mirrored him automatically, her breathing settling into the pattern her father had taught, deep and controlled. "We begin slowly," Hideyoshi said. "Basic forms only. Follow my lead." He moved into the first position of the traditional kata, his movements deliberate and precise. Akiko followed, her own form rusty but fundamentally sound. They progressed through the sequence, wooden swords cutting air in practiced patterns, feet shifting on the smooth wooden floor. By the third repetition, Akiko's confidence was growing, her body recalling what her conscious mind had buried. The kata flowed more naturally, her timing improving with each pass. "Good," Hideyoshi said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Now, let us try something more challenging. Defend yourself." Without warning, he shifted from formal practice to a direct attack. Still controlled, but requiring an active response rather than memorized movements. Akiko reacted instinctively, her bokken rising to block his downward strike. For several minutes they engaged in this improvised practice, Hideyoshi gradually increasing the speed and complexity of his attacks while carefully gauging her responses. Akiko felt her body awakening, skills long dormant rising to the surface. Each successful parry, each correctly executed counterattack, brought a fresh surge of confidence. Master Genku watched from the sidelines, occasionally calling out corrections or encouragement. "Your stance is too wide, Akiko-san. Yes, better. Remember to breathe through the movement, not against it. Excellent block." By the time they paused for rest, Akiko was breathing hard, perspiration dampening her temple robes. Her arms trembled slightly from the unaccustomed exertion, but exhilaration coursed through her veins. "You remember more than I dared hope," Hideyoshi said, wiping his own brow. "With daily practice, your former skill will return quickly." "Indeed," Master Genku agreed. "Takeshi's daughter has his natural talent. A few weeks of dedicated training, and she will be formidable once more." A few weeks. The time frame struck Akiko with unexpected force. After 8 years of stasis, of existing rather than living, events were suddenly moving at dizzying speed. In just days she had reclaimed her voice, her name, and now began to reclaim her skills. What would the coming weeks bring? As if reading her thoughts, Hideyoshi said gently, "We proceed at your pace, Akiko-san. There is no need to rush what has waited 8 years." She shook her head, newfound determination straightening her spine. "No, time favors our enemies, not us. Lord Kaito's son has resources and men at his command. The longer we delay, the more likely he is to discover my survival, if he hasn't already." "A valid concern," Master Genku acknowledged, "but remember that haste makes for poor strategy. While you train to regain your physical skills, we must also plan carefully. The path to justice is rarely straight or simple." "The manuscript," Hideyoshi said. "May I see it? Understanding exactly what we protect may help shape our approach." Akiko hesitated. For 8 years, the manuscript had remained sealed, untouched in its oilcloth wrapping. Her father's last instruction, to keep it hidden, to tell no one of its existence, had guided her actions for so long. But circumstances had changed. Her silence was broken, her hiding place discovered, and Hideyoshi was her father's most trusted student, the man who had searched for 8 years seeking justice for her family. "Yes," she said finally, "it's time." In her simple quarters, Akiko knelt beside the small bundle she had brought from Kazetani. Unwrapping the oilcloth revealed an unassuming wooden box, its surface darkened with age and sealed with wax bearing her father's personal stamp. Hideyoshi and Master Genku knelt beside her, their expressions solemn as she broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside lay a slim volume bound in faded blue silk, its pages yellowed but intact. "I never read it," she confessed. "Father said its contents were for the imperial family alone, that he was merely its guardian, not its owner." Hideyoshi nodded. "Your father was a man of principle. If he believed the text belonged to the emperor, he would die before betraying that trust." "And so he did," Master Genku said softly. Akiko lifted the manuscript carefully, feeling the weight of history and of blood in her hands. She offered it to Hideyoshi, who accepted it with a respectful bow. "Should we read it?" she asked, uncertainty coloring her voice. "If my father thought its contents too dangerous—" "We need not read the techniques themselves," Hideyoshi assured her, "but understanding its provenance, its history, might help us determine the safest path forward." He opened the cover gently, revealing a title page written in formal calligraphy. "The 17 Celestial Forms, Imperial Guards Techniques." Below, in smaller characters, "Transcribed in the 14th year of Emperor Go-Daigo by Master Suzuki Ryoma, head of the Imperial Guard." Master Genku drew in a sharp breath. The Kenmu Restoration period, when Emperor Go-Daigo attempted to seize power from the shogunate. "A tumultuous time," Hideyoshi agreed, carefully turning to the manuscript's introduction. "The emperor surrounded himself with skilled warriors loyal only to the throne, bypassing the traditional samurai hierarchy. Which made many powerful enemies," Master Genku added. The shogun and regional lords felt threatened by a strong emperor, with his own elite fighting force. Akiko listened intently, pieces falling into place. "So this manuscript contains techniques taught only to those who guarded the emperor himself. Techniques kept separate from the samurai traditions." "Exactly," Hideyoshi said, scanning the introduction without delving into the techniques that followed. "According to this preface, the 17 celestial forms were developed specifically to counter standard samurai fighting methods. They were never taught outside the Imperial Guard, and when the restoration failed, the knowledge was thought lost. Until it resurfaced in my father's possession," Akiko concluded. But how did he come to have it? Master Genku stroked his wispy beard thoughtfully. Your grandfather served in the imperial palace for many years. Perhaps it came to him, and he passed it to your father for safekeeping. And Lord Kaito somehow learned of its existence, Hideyoshi added. High-techs containing techniques specifically designed to defeat samurai would be priceless to an ambitious lord with dreams of power beyond his province. Or to his equally ambitious son, Akiko said grimly. Hideyoshi closed the manuscript carefully, rewrapping it in its protective cloth. This is even more significant than I realized. If these techniques were to spread among those who oppose the current order, civil war, Master Genku finished softly, as in the days of the Kenmu restoration. The weight of responsibility settled on Akiko's shoulders, heavier than before, yet somehow easier to bear now that it was shared. What do we do? Return it to the imperial family. That would be the honorable path. Hideyoshi agreed. But reaching the emperor is no simple task. We would need to pass through layers of courtiers, officials, and guards, many of whom may have their own agendas or loyalties to various lords. Including potentially to Kaito's son, Master Genku pointed out. Then we need allies, Akiko said decisively. People who knew my father, who understand the importance of keeping this knowledge protected. Hideyoshi nodded. I have contacts in the capital, former students of your father, merchants who owe me favors, even a few officials in the imperial court, but gathering them will take time. Time during which you must continue your training, Master Genku reminded her. If you are to travel beyond these protected walls, you must be able to defend yourself, and the manuscript, against those who would take it by force. Akiko straightened her shoulders, a new resolve hardening within her. 8 years of hiding had not been wasted, if they had preserved this dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Now the path forward required not silence, but action, not invisibility, but presence. Then we begin today, she said. Training, planning, preparing. She looked at Hideyoshi, finding strength in his steady gaze. For 8 years, I pretended to be mute, to avoid being claimed by those who destroyed my family. But I am Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of the swordmaster Takeshi, and I will reclaim my voice, my skills, and my family's honor. If you're enjoying this tale of courage rediscovered and secrets revealed, I hope you'll consider subscribing so we can continue bringing stories of honor and redemption set in the shadow of cherry blossoms and steel. The days that followed established a rhythm both demanding and purposeful. Each morning began with meditation in the temple's main hall, followed by physical training that left Akiko's muscles trembling with fatigue but growing stronger by the day. Hideyoshi proved a patient but exacting teacher, pushing her to reclaim not only the forms she had once known, but to surpass her previous abilities. Your father taught you well, and he observed on the 5th day, after Akiko had successfully executed a complex sequence of defensive moves. Your foundation is excellent. He believed women should be able to defend themselves, she replied, wiping perspiration from her brow, though he never expected I would need to use these skills, as I do now. Afternoons were devoted to strategy. Master Genku would join them in the temple library, where maps of the provinces were spread across low tables and messages arrived daily from Hideyoshi's network of allies. Akiko learned that this network was more extensive than she had initially realized. Former students of her father, merchants who traveled between provinces, even a few officials in the imperial court who remembered the Miyamoto name with respect. Lord Kaito's son has expanded his father's territory significantly in the past 2 years, Hideyoshi explained, indicating regions on the map that had fallen under the ambitious lord's control. He's formed alliances with 3 neighboring daimyo, and rumors suggest he seeks to curry favor with the shogun himself. Does he know the manuscript survived the fire? Akiko asked, the question that had haunted her for days. I believe not, Hideyoshi replied. His men search for information about your family's techniques, but they speak of recreating lost knowledge, not recovering an existing text. That may change after the bandit attack on Kazutani, Master Genku pointed out. The bandit leader recognized you, Akiko-san. If he reports to his master, the possibility hung in the air between them. Akiko had wrestled with guilt over leaving Madame Kiku and the village potentially exposed to danger, but Hideyoshi had sent word to Lord Isao's samurai, alerting them to potential threats without revealing her true identity. We must accelerate our plans, and Hideyoshi decided. The longer we wait, the greater the risk. In the evenings, when formal training ended, Akiko often found herself drawn to the small shrine at the far edge of the temple grounds. Dedicated to Hachiman, the god of war and protector of warriors, it offered a quiet place for reflection away from the bustle of temple life. It was there, on the 8th evening of their stay, that Hideyoshi found her kneeling before the simple stone altar, lost in thought. "May I join you?" he asked softly, careful not to startle her. Akiko nodded, making space beside her on the stone bench. For a time, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the gentle rustle of pine needles in the evening breeze. "Do you remember the autumn festival at your father's estate?" Hideyoshi asked suddenly. "The one where all the students demonstrated forms for the village officials?" Akiko smiled at the unexpected memory. Of course. Father was so proud that day. His students performed beautifully. "Do you remember what you did?" She glanced at him curiously. "I watched from the veranda with my mother, as always." Hideyoshi shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "Not that year. That year you slipped away from your mother and climbed the old maple tree at the edge of the practice ground. You watched the entire demonstration from its branches until your father spotted you and nearly lost his composure in the middle of his address." Akiko's eyes widened. "You remember that? I was what, 15? 16? 16, he confirmed. "Wearing a blue kimono with dragonfly patterns. You had flowers in your hair." Something in his tone made her heart flutter strangely. "I didn't think anyone noticed me." "I did," he said simply, his eyes meeting hers. "I always did." The admission hung in the air between them, fraught with unspoken meaning. Akiko found herself at a loss for words, her recently recovered voice failing her once more. "Forgive my boldness," Hideyoshi said, looking away toward the shrine. "It's not my place to speak of such things, especially now when your safety must be our only concern." "No," Akiko said quickly, finding her voice again. "Please don't apologize. I never knew." "How could you? You were the master's daughter, far above a simple student like myself. And then I left to serve Lord Oda, and when I returned years later—" His voice trailed off, the tragedy that had separated them remaining unspoken. "And yet here we are," Akiko said softly. "After 8 years, our paths cross again." "Fate has strange designs," Hideyoshi agreed. He hesitated, then added, "Though I confess, fate had some assistance. When I heard rumors of a mute tea-house girl who appeared shortly after the fire, I hoped beyond reason it might be you." The revelation sent warmth spreading through Akiko's chest. For 8 years she had believed herself completely alone, forgotten by all who had known her before. To learn that Hideyoshi had not only remembered but actively searched for her shifted something fundamental in her understanding of the past 8 years. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not forgetting." "How could I?" His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You were the light of your father's dojo, the one who saw beauty where others saw only discipline and duty." Before she could respond, the temple bell rang, signaling the evening meal. The moment between them gently dissolved, though something had changed. A door opened that could not easily be closed again. "We should go," Hideyoshi said, rising and offering his hand to help her up. "Master Genku will be waiting with news from his messengers." Akiko accepted his hand, noticing how he held it a moment longer than strictly necessary before releasing it. As they walked back toward the main temple buildings, a comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated occasionally by the call of evening birds from the surrounding forest. Master Genku awaited them in his private study, a scroll freshly arrived from the capital spread before him. His expression was grave as they entered, and knelt across from him. "News?" Hideyoshi asked without preamble. The old monk nodded. "From my contact in the imperial court. Lord Kaito Noburu has been granted an official position as advisor to the shogun on matters of provincial security. That gives him access to the shogun's inner circle," Hideyoshi said, his brow furrowing. and legitimate authority to move troops between provinces without question. Precisely, Master Genku agreed, but there is more. He has also requested permission to investigate rumors of surviving texts from the Kenmu Restoration period, specifically military treatises that might pose a threat to the shogunate's stability. Akiko's blood ran cold. He's looking for the manuscript openly now, using his position to give the search official sanction. Yes, Master Genku confirmed, which means our window of opportunity narrows. Once he begins official investigations, travel will become more difficult, particularly for anyone associated with the Miyamoto name. We must reach the capital before he consolidates his position further, Hideyoshi decided. Present the manuscript directly to the Emperor's chief advisor, along with evidence of Kaito's crimes. And what of that evidence? Master Genku asked pointedly. Beyond Akiko-san's testimony, what proof exists that Lord Kaito was responsible for the fire that claimed her family? Hideyoshi and Akiko exchanged glances. It was the weakness in their plan that neither had fully addressed until now. Testimony from a woman believed dead for 8 years might not be enough to convince imperial officials to move against a lord newly elevated to the shogun's council. The bandit leader, Akiko said suddenly. The one from Kazutani. He knew who I was. He spoke of Lord Kaito directly, admitted the connection. A bandit's word against a lord's would carry little weight in court, Master Genku said gently. Unless we could prove the connection between Kaito's son and the bandits definitively, Hideyoshi finished, his eyes lighting with realization. If we could capture the bandit leader, force a confession, that would be evidence even the shogun couldn't ignore, Akiko agreed. Excitement building, especially if the confession revealed the truth about my family's murder as well. A dangerous gambit, Master Genku cautioned. These bandits are clearly skilled fighters, and they know the terrain well. But predictable, Hideyoshi countered. Their pattern of attacks follows the harvest. They've already struck Kazutani. According to our information, the village of Shimoda, a day's ride east, will complete its harvest within the week. You propose to set a trap, Master Genku said, understanding dawning in his eyes. One with sufficient bait to ensure the bandit leader himself appears, Hideyoshi confirmed, turning to Akiko. And there is no bait more tempting than a Miyamoto risen from the ashes. If this journey of a silent warrior finding her voice has moved you, I'd be grateful if you'd share this story with others who appreciate tales where honor and courage triumph over darkness. Dawn broke misty and cool as they departed Kongoji Temple, Master Genku and several monks gathering to bid them farewell. Dressed now in practical traveling clothes, hakama and short kimono that allowed freedom of movement, with her father's sword at her back, Akiko bore little resemblance to the tea-house servant she had been just weeks before. May the gods watch over your journey, Master Genku said, bowing deeply. Return to us when your task is complete, and know that Kongoji remains your sanctuary for as long as you require. Akiko returned the bow with equal respect. Your kindness and wisdom have given me back more than my voice, Master Genku. You have given me purpose. As they mounted their horses and set off down the mountain path, Akiko cast one last glance at the temple, this haven that had allowed her to reclaim so much of what she had lost. Ahead lay danger, uncertainty, and the culmination of 8 years of waiting, but also perhaps justice, and beyond that, possibility. Their plan was simple in concept, though complex in execution. They would travel to the outskirts of Shimoda village and spread rumors through carefully chosen contacts that a woman of the Miyamoto line had been seen in the area. Meanwhile, they would establish a hidden camp in the forested hills overlooking the main approach to the village, the route the bandits would most likely take based on their previous attacks. We must be patient, Hideyoshi cautioned as they rode. It may take several days for our bait to draw attention. The bandit leader is cautious, as we saw in Kazutani. 8 years of silence has taught me patience, Akiko replied with a small smile. A few more days is nothing. They reached their destination by late afternoon, making camp in a well-concealed hollow surrounded by dense pines. From this vantage, They could observe both the road to Shimoda and the surrounding hills without being easily spotted themselves. Hideyoshi left briefly to meet with his contact in the village, a merchant who owed him a debt and would help spread the rumor of a Miyamoto survivor seeking information about her family's old allies. By nightfall he had returned, reporting that their bait was set. "Now we wait," he said, building a small, nearly smokeless fire for warmth, "and we prepare." The next 2 days passed in tense vigilance. They took turns watching the road while continuing Akiko's training in the secluded hollow. By the third day, Hideyoshi's network of informants reported increased interest in the Miyamoto rumors, strangers asking questions in village sake houses, unfamiliar faces observing travelers on the main road. "They're investigating," Hideyoshi said, satisfaction evident in his voice, "testing the information before committing their forces." On the fourth morning, their patience was rewarded. From their observation point, they spotted a group of riders approaching the village from the east, 6 men moving with the disciplined formation that belied their bandit disguise. "The same group that attacked Kazutani," Hideyoshi confirmed, studying them through a small spyglass. "And yes, their leader is with them." Akiko's heart quickened, a mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through her veins. "Is it time?" Hideyoshi shook his head. "Not yet. They're still cautious, still searching. Let them commit fully to the hunt before we spring our trap." Throughout the day, they observed the bandits' methodical search of the village and its surroundings. By evening, the men had split into pairs, extending their search to the outlying farms and forest paths. "They're growing frustrated," Hideyoshi observed. "Good. Frustrated men make mistakes." As night fell, they watched the bandits regroup at a small inn at the village edge. Through his network, Hideyoshi arranged for the innkeeper to serve them liberally with sake, ensuring at least some would be less than alert come morning. "Tomorrow," he decided as they shared a simple meal in their hidden camp. "When they resume their search, 2 will likely remain behind at the inn while the others continue looking. We'll isolate the leader, capture him away from his men, and secure our confession." Akiko nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The weight of it felt familiar again after weeks of practice. "And if the others interfere?" "We avoid killing if possible," Hideyoshi said firmly. "Dead bandits tell no tales, and we need their leader's confession to have meaning." They spent the remainder of the evening refining their plan, accounting for contingencies, preparing for the confrontation ahead. When they finally settled down to sleep, Akiko found herself unusually alert, her mind racing with possibilities both hopeful and dire. "Rest," Hideyoshi advised gently, noticing her restlessness. "Tomorrow requires clear minds and steady hands." 8 years, she said softly. 8 years of silence, of hiding, of pretending to be someone else. Tomorrow it ends, one way or another. "It ends with justice," Hideyoshi promised. "For your family, for you, for the 8 years stolen from you." Akiko managed a few hours of fitful sleep before dawn broke, revealing a day bright and clear, a stark contrast to the shadowy work that lay ahead. They prepared in near silence, checking weapons, securing provisions for a swift departure once their task was complete. As predicted, the bandits dispersed again after breakfast, the leader and 1 companion heading toward the western forest where rumors placed the Miyamoto survivors' camp. Hideyoshi and Akiko moved quickly, circling through the trees to intercept them at a narrow ravine where the path constricted between rocky outcrops. "Remember," Hideyoshi whispered as they took position, "we need him alive and able to speak. Focus on disabling, not killing." Akiko nodded, hand steady on the hilt of her father's sword. The weeks of intensive training had prepared her body for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare her heart for facing one of the men responsible for destroying her family and stealing 8 years of her life. They didn't wait long. The sound of horses approaching echoed through the ravine, followed by the appearance of 2 riders, the bandit leader and a younger man, both armed and alert despite last night's sake. Hideyoshi gave the signal, and their plan sprang into action. A tripwire they had prepared across the narrow path caught the horses' legs, sending both riders tumbling to the ground. Before they could recover, Hideyoshi and Akiko emerged from hiding, swords drawn. "Don't move," Hideyoshi commanded, his blade at the younger bandit's throat. "This can end without bloodshed if you cooperate." The leader, recovering quickly despite his fall, drew his sword with a snarl of defiance. "The Ronin from Kazetani," he spat, "still interfering where you don't belong." His eyes shifted to Akiko, narrowing with recognition. "And the ghost herself. No longer pretending to be mute, I see." Akiko stepped forward, her sword held with the confident poise that had returned through weeks of training. "Miyamoto Akiko," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Daughter of Miyamoto Takeshi, whom your master murdered 8 years ago." The bandit laughed harshly. So the rumors were true. The little bird escaped the flames. He adopted a fighting stance, seemingly unconcerned that his companion remained at Hideyoshi's mercy. "Lord Kaito's son will pay even more handsomely for your head than for news of your survival." "We don't seek battle," Hideyoshi said calmly. "Only truth. Confess to your role in the Miyamoto massacre, identify who ordered it, and you may yet live to see another dawn." "Confess." The bandit's scarred face twisted in mockery. "To you? A masterless dog and a woman who hid as a mute servant for 8 years? I think not." Without warning, he whistled sharply, a signal that echoed through the ravine. From the rocks above, 2 more bandits appeared, bows drawn and aimed at Hideyoshi and Akiko. "Did you think I would be so easily trapped?" the leader sneered. "That I wouldn't recognize an ambush when I see one." He gestured to his men. "Kill the Ronin. The woman we take alive. Lord Kaito's son will want to question her about the manuscript." Time seemed to slow as Akiko processed their suddenly desperate situation. The carefully laid trap had failed. They were now the ones caught in an ambush. Yet even as fear threatened to paralyze her, something else rose within. A clarity, a resolve born from 8 years of waiting and weeks of preparation. Moving with fluid grace that would have made her father proud, she executed a sweeping attack that forced the bandit leader backward, away from Hideyoshi, who now faced the additional threat from above. The younger bandit, momentarily free from Hideyoshi's blade, scrambled for his fallen weapon. "Run!" Hideyoshi shouted to her, engaging both the young bandit and deflecting an arrow from above with remarkable skill. "Take the horses! Get to the capital!" But Akiko had not broken 8 years of silence to run now. Instead, she pressed her attack on the bandit leader, driving him further into the ravine, away from his archer's clear line of sight. Her blade moved in patterns both familiar and instinctive, forcing her opponent to focus solely on defense. "You've had training," he grunted, blocking a particularly vicious strike. "But you're still just a woman playing at being samurai." Akiko didn't waste breath responding. Let him underestimate her. Let his arrogance create openings in his defense. 8 years of silence had taught her the power of listening, of observing, of waiting for the perfect moment to act. That moment came when the bandit glanced briefly toward his companions, concerned by the sounds of Hideyoshi's continued resistance. In that instant of divided attention, Akiko executed a feint her father had taught her, one specifically designed to exploit overconfidence. The bandit, expecting a direct attack, moved to block the wrong line. Akiko's blade slipped past his guard, opening a shallow cut across his sword arm. He cursed, dropping his weapon, his confidence visibly shaken. Before he could recover, Akiko kicked the fallen sword away and pressed her own blade against his throat. "Signal your men to stand down," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for defiance. "Or join my family in death." The bandit leader hesitated, calculation evident in his eyes. Then, remarkably, he began to laugh, a bitter, defeated sound. 8 years of running from ghosts," he said, "only to be undone by one in the flesh." He raised his uninjured arm and whistled again, a different pattern this time. Above them, the archers lowered their bows. "A wise choice," Akiko said, maintaining pressure on her blade. "Now about that confession." By midday they had what they needed. The bandit leader, secured with ropes and nursing his wounded pride as much as his injured arm, had provided a full confession, not out of nobility but pragmatic self-preservation. Once convinced that Lord Kaito's son would kill him regardless to eliminate witnesses, he had calculated that cooperation offered his only chance of survival. His statement, recorded meticulously on rice paper with his reluctant signature and seal, detailed not only the attack on the Miyamoto estate 8 years ago, but the direct orders from Lord Kaito, later inherited by his son. It named co-conspirators, specified payments, and most importantly confirmed the motive: acquisition of the imperial manuscript by any means necessary. "What now?" the bandit asked sullenly, as Hideyoshi secured the confession in a waterproof case. "You promised I might live, and so you shall," Hideyoshi replied, "though not with freedom. You will accompany us to the capital as further testimony to the truth of this document." The other bandits had been disarmed but released. Without horses or weapons, they posed little immediate threat, and dead men could not spread the crucial word that Miyamoto Akiko lived and sought justice for her family. "They will report to Kaito's son," Akiko noted as they prepared for immediate departure, the bound bandit leader secured on his own horse. "Precisely," Hideyoshi agreed, "which is why speed is now essential. We must reach the capital before he can mobilize forces to stop us." They rode hard throughout the day, following little-used forest paths that Hideyoshi knew from his years of clandestine travel. By nightfall, they had covered impressive distance, the lights of a larger town visible in the valley below their resting place. "We'll rest the horses briefly," Hideyoshi decided, "then continue through the night. My contact awaits us with fresh mounts at dawn." While their prisoner dozed fitfully, secured to a tree, Akiko and Hideyoshi shared a simple meal of rice balls and dried fish. The day's exertions had left Akiko physically exhausted, but mentally alert, the reality of their success still settling in her consciousness. "We did it," she said softly, wonder in her voice. "After 8 years. We actually did it." Hideyoshi's smile held equal parts satisfaction and caution. "The first step only. The road to the capital remains dangerous, and even with the confession, convincing the imperial court will require delicacy and perhaps some luck." "And yet," Akiko persisted, "for the first time in 8 years, I feel hope. Real hope, not just the determination to survive another day." Her hand found his in the darkness, a gesture that had become increasingly natural between them. His fingers interlaced with hers, warm and reassuring. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. "Not just of your swordsmanship today, impressive as it was, but of your resilience these 8 years. Lesser spirits would have broken under such burden." "I nearly did," she admitted. "There were days when maintaining silence, when living as someone else seemed too great a price. Days when I considered simply speaking, revealing myself, accepting whatever came." "What stopped you?" Akiko considered the question carefully. "At first fear, later somehow purpose. The knowledge that my silence protected something greater than myself, my father's trust, the Emperor's secret techniques. And now? Now I understand that there are times for silence and times for voice. My 8 years of silence preserved what needed preserving. But justice requires voice, clear and unwavering." The journey to the capital took 4 days of hard riding, changing horses at prearranged points, avoiding main roads and checkpoints where Lord Kaito's influence might reach. Their prisoner, initially sullen and resistant, grew increasingly cooperative as the distance from his former master increased. Self-preservation. Hideyoshi explained to Akiko, the bandit had calculated that his best chance for leniency now lay in full cooperation with those who held his fate. On the morning of the 5th day, the capital city came into view, a sprawling expanse of tiled roofs, temple spires and castle walls surrounding the imperial palace at its center. Akiko, who had never traveled so far from her home province, felt momentarily overwhelmed by the scale and grandeur. "It's enormous," she breathed, reining in her horse to take in the panorama. "And filled with both allies and enemies," Hideyoshi cautioned. "From this point, we proceed with utmost care. Lord Kaito's son may already have agents searching for us." They approached through a merchant's entrance, where Hideyoshi's contact, an elderly tea merchant with connections to the imperial household, waited with a covered cart. Their prisoner was concealed within, while Akiko and Hideyoshi adopted the guise of the merchant's assistants, accompanying him on his regular delivery to the outer palace. The chief advisor has been discreetly informed of your arrival, the tea merchant murmured, as they passed through the first checkpoint with remarkably little scrutiny. He will receive you in the Garden of Whispered Pines, away from curious eyes. Akiko marveled at the layers of security they passed through, gates and checkpoints, samurai guards and silent attendants whose eyes missed nothing. Yet at each barrier, the tea merchant's status as a trusted imperial supplier eased their passage, his cheerful banter with the guards masking the tension that thrummed through his companions. The Garden of Whispered Pines proved to be a secluded courtyard deep within the palace complex, enclosed by high walls and dense foliage that ensured privacy. Waiting for them beside a small pavilion was an elderly man whose simple robes belied his importance, Ishida Nobuhiro, chief advisor to the emperor, and decades earlier a fellow student alongside Akiko's father in the same dojo. Takashi Hideyoshi, the advisor, greeted them with formal correctness but genuine warmth. It has been many years. He turned to Akiko, studying her face with keen eyes that seemed to peer into her very soul. And you must be Takeshi's daughter. The resemblance is remarkable. When word reached me that you might have survived the fire, I scarcely dared hope. Akiko bowed deeply, the formal court manners her mother had insisted upon returning, as if the intervening years had never happened. Ishida-sama, your willingness to receive us honors my father's memory. Rise, child, the advisor said, gesturing toward the pavilion. We have much to discuss, and even here time is not our ally. Within the pavilion's privacy, they presented their evidence, the bandit's written confession, his personal testimony, given with grudging precision from the cart where he remained secured, and finally, the manuscript itself, which the advisor received with reverence bordering on awe. After all these years, he murmured, carefully examining the binding without opening the text. The 17 celestial forms, thought lost forever. My father preserved it with his life, Akiko said, as did my mother, my brothers, my entire family save myself. And you preserved it with 8 years of silence, the advisor acknowledged, respect evident in his tone. A sacrifice the emperor will recognize, I assure you. Then you believe us? Hideyoshi asked. You accept the evidence against Lord Kaito's son? The advisor's expression grew grave. I do, but matters are complicated by Kaito Noburu's recent elevation. He has the shogun's ear and has been granted significant authority. Moving against him requires incontrovertible proof and perfect timing. The confession, Akiko began, but the advisor raised a hand, is compelling but could be challenged. The word of a bandit against a lord holds little weight without additional verification. He studied the manuscript again. However, this text, combined with your testimony as the Miyamoto heir, that creates a more difficult case for him to dismiss. What do you propose? Hideyoshi asked. The emperor holds court tomorrow. Lord Kaito's son will be present, as will the shogun's representative. The advisor's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. I will arrange for your appearance, a surprise witness whose very existence undermines Kaito's claim that the Miyamoto line and its secrets perished in the fire. You would have me confront him directly? Akiko asked, her heart racing at the prospect. Sometimes justice requires not just evidence but theater, the advisor said with surprising frankness. Imagine a court assembled, Lord Kaito's son presenting his plans for rooting out dangerous texts that might threaten the shogunate, and then the entrance of Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of the man his father murdered, bearing the very manuscript he has sought through bloodshed. The boldness of the plan both alarmed and appealed to Akiko. After 8 years of hiding, of silence, the thought of stepping into the imperial court, of facing her family's destroyer before the most powerful men in Japan, terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. It's dangerous, Hideyoshi cautioned. If Kaito suspects a trap, he might act rashly. He will be surrounded by imperial guards and courtiers, the advisor assured them. Violence in the emperor's presence is unthinkable, even for an ambitious lord. And our guest? Hideyoshi nodded toward the cart where their prisoner waited. Will remain secured until needed. Should Kaito attempt to deny the evidence, the bandit's personal testimony becomes our final revelation. The advisor rose, decision made. Rest tonight, tomorrow justice long delayed will finally find its voice. If you found yourself captivated by this tale of honor and resilience, please consider following us for more stories where courage triumphs over silence. They were escorted to private quarters within the palace complex, simple but comfortable rooms where they could refresh themselves and prepare for the momentous day ahead. Imperial servants brought fresh clothing for Akiko, robes befitting her station, as daughter of a respected swordmaster, in the Miyamoto family colors of indigo and silver. As evening fell, Akiko stood before a polished metal mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Gone was Ren, the tea-house servant, with her downcast eyes and humble attire. In her place stood Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of the swordmaster, heir to her family's legacy of honor and sacrifice. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reflection. She opened it to find Hideyoshi waiting, similarly transformed by fresh garments that restored something of the samurai dignity his years as a ronin had weathered but never erased. "May I enter?" he asked formally. Akiko stepped aside, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been during their weeks of training and traveling together. Something about their transformed appearances, about the momentous threshold they stood upon, created a strange new awareness between them. "Tomorrow," Hideyoshi said without preamble, "everything changes. For both of us." "Yes," she agreed softly. "After 8 years, my silence ends completely. My family's killers face justice, and the manuscript returns to its rightful guardians. And then?" The question hung between them, fraught with unspoken possibilities. Akiko moved to the small window that overlooked a garden illuminated by paper lanterns. "Then I reclaim my name fully. Perhaps my family's lands, if the Emperor is generous." Hideyoshi joined her at the window, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool evening air. "And what of us, Akiko? The future we spoke of at Kongoji Temple?" The directness of the question caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Hideyoshi had always been forthright, his words as precise and intentional as his sword strikes. "I've lived 8 years as someone else," she said carefully. 8 years pretending, hiding, existing rather than living. I'm only beginning to remember who Miyamoto Akiko truly is." She turned to face him fully. "But I know she is someone who honors her promises, who recognizes loyalty and sacrifice, who does not forget those who helped her when all seemed lost." Hideyoshi's eyes searched hers, seeking something beyond her carefully chosen words. "Is that all I am to you? A loyal retainer who kept his vow to your father?" The question pierced straight to her heart, demanding truth, not the diplomatic phrases of court etiquette, but the raw honesty they had begun to share in quieter moments. "No," she said simply. "You are much more. The man who searched for 8 years when others abandoned hope. The man who saw Miyamoto Akiko beneath Ren's silent exterior. The man who taught me to reclaim not just my voice, but my purpose." She took a steadying breath. "The man I have come to care for deeply, in ways I scarcely understand myself." Relief and something warmer softened Hideyoshi's features. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he reached for her hand. When she did not pull away, he raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture more intimate than his previous kiss to her knuckles. "Tomorrow we face Lord Kaito's son together," he said, his voice low and intense. "But know this, whether you choose to reclaim your lands and title or to forge a new path entirely, I will stand beside you, not as your father's student or your protector, but as a man who has found something he never expected while fulfilling his duty." "And what is that?" Akiko asked, though she knew the answer in her quickening heartbeat. "Love," Hideyoshi said simply. "For the woman who pretended to be mute for 8 years, only to reclaim her voice with courage that humbles me." The word hung in the air between them, at once terrifying and exhilarating. Akiko had not allowed herself to think of love during her years of hiding, had trained herself to expect nothing beyond survival, to want nothing that might compromise her necessary invisibility. Yet here it was, offered freely by the man who had changed everything, the man who had given her back her voice, her name, her purpose, and now perhaps her heart. Tomorrow, she said softly. We face justice together. And afterward. She stepped closer, resting her free hand lightly on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. Afterward, we discover together what it means to live, rather than merely survive. Hideyoshi's smile held promise and certainty in equal measure. Together, he agreed, bending slowly to press a gentle kiss to her lips, their first a seal on promises spoken and unspoken, a bridge between past sacrifice and future possibility. Dawn broke clear and bright over the imperial city, as if the heavens themselves approved the day's purpose. Akiko rose early, completing her preparations with careful attention to detail. The indigo and silver robes of the Miyamoto family settled around her like a second skin, at once familiar and strange after so many years in humble cotton. At her waist, she wore the tanto Hideyoshi had gifted her, a talisman of protection, yes, but also a tangible connection to the future they had cautiously begun to envision together. Her father's sword remained carefully wrapped, to be presented alongside the manuscript as evidence of her identity. The great hall of the imperial court buzzed with activity as nobles and officials took their places according to rank. The emperor himself remained partially hidden behind screens of golden silk, visible only as a silhouette to most present. At his right hand sat the chief advisor, Ishida, his face impassive as he watched Lord Kaito Noburu approach the dais to present his proposal. Kaito cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to power. His voice carried clearly through the hall as he spoke of threats to the shogunate, of dangerous texts that might destabilize the established order, of his plans to root out such dangerous knowledge. Most revered Emperor, he concluded with a deep bow, I humbly request authority to investigate these matters fully, to ensure that no relics of the Kenmu Restoration's failed rebellion resurface to threaten your divine peace. In the antechamber where they waited, Akiko listened to his words with mounting anger. This man, son of the one who had murdered her family, now sought imperial sanction to continue his father's bloody work. She felt Hideyoshi's steadying hand on her arm, grounding her in the present moment. Remember, he murmured, your voice is your strongest weapon now. Use it with precision. The signal came, 3 clear notes on a court flute. The doors to the antechamber slid open, and Akiko stepped forward, Hideyoshi a respectful pace behind her. A wave of murmurs swept through the assembled courtiers as she walked the length of the hall, her eyes fixed on Lord Kaito, who had turned at the disturbance. She watched confusion, then disbelief, then fear cross his features in quick succession. Most revered Emperor, she said, her voice clear and strong, as she knelt in formal obeisance before the imperial dais. I am Miyamoto Akiko, daughter of Miyamoto Takeshi, who served as swordmaster to your honored father. I come to present evidence of crimes against my family and against the imperial household itself. Lord Kaito found his voice, though it lacked its previous authority. This is some trick. The Miyamoto family perished 8 years ago. This woman is an impostor. Am I? Akiko rose smoothly to her feet, facing him directly. Then how do I possess this? She unwrapped her father's sword, holding it aloft for all to see the distinctive Miyamoto crest on its hilt. And this? The manuscript, which she placed reverently on the low table before the imperial screen. Lord Kaito's face had gone pale. Forgeries, he insisted, but his voice wavered. Your father sought this text, Akiko continued, addressing not just Kaito, but the entire court. The 17 celestial forms, containing techniques developed solely for the Imperial Guard. When my father refused to surrender it, your father ordered our estate burned with my family inside. Lies. Kaito shouted, desperation edging his voice. Where is your proof? Here, said Hideyoshi, stepping forward with the sealed confession. The testimony of your own bandit captain, who carried out your orders, as he once carried out your father's. The chief advisor accepted the document, reading it carefully before passing it behind the imperial screen. For long moments, silence held the court in its grip. Then the emperor's voice, soft but clear. Miyamoto Akiko, You have preserved both your life and an imperial treasure at great personal cost. For 8 years, you maintained silence to protect this knowledge. Such loyalty will not go unrewarded. Relief and vindication washed through Akiko in equal measure. 8 years of hiding, of silence, of pretending to be someone else, all leading to this moment of truth. Lord Kaito Noburu, the Emperor continued, his tone hardening perceptibly. You stand accused of continuing your father's crime, seeking to obtain imperial secrets through violence and deceit. How do you answer these charges? Kaito looked wildly around the court, finding no allies in the sea of carefully blank faces. His hand moved toward his sword hilt, then stopped as imperial guards stepped forward. It was my right, he said finally, his voice cracking. My father died seeking that text. The Miyamoto had no claim to imperial techniques. They were common swordmasters, nothing more. My father was guardian, not owner, Akiko replied calmly, as I have been these 8 years. The manuscript belongs to the imperial line alone, as we have always maintained. From behind the screen came the Emperor's judgment. Lord Kaito Noburu is stripped of lands and title. His crimes will be investigated fully by my personal guard. The manuscript shall return to imperial custody where it belongs. As Kaito was led away, his face a mask of thwarted rage, Akiko felt a strange lightness, as if a weight she had carried for 8 years had finally been lifted. She turned to find Hideyoshi watching her, pride and something deeper shining in his eyes. It is done, she whispered, her voice catching slightly. No, he replied softly. It is just beginning. In the days that followed, imperial decree restored the Miyamoto lands and position. Akiko, as sole heir, found herself suddenly mistress of an estate she had not seen since the night of the fire. The Emperor, impressed by her courage and loyalty, appointed her an honorary member of the Imperial Guard, the first woman to hold such a position, even in name. But it was not lands or titles that occupied her thoughts as she stood in the garden of her restored family home, watching cherry blossoms drift on the spring breeze. It was the future, a concept that had seemed impossibly distant during her years of hiding. The gardeners have done well, Hideyoshi said, coming to stand beside her. Your father would be pleased to see the dojo rebuilt. And what of you? Akiko asked, turning to face him. Now that your vow is fulfilled, what path will you follow? He smiled, the expression transforming his serious features. I believe I made that clear the night before we faced the court. Unless... A shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. Unless your feelings have changed with your circumstances. Akiko reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. 8 years I spent in silence, hiding who I was, suppressing my voice for safety's sake. Now that I can finally speak freely, do you think I would begin with anything but truth? She stepped closer, her free hand rising to touch his face. I love you, Takashi Hideyoshi. Not for the duty you fulfilled, but for the man you are. His arms encircled her, drawing her against him with gentle strength. And I love you, Miyamoto Akiko, not the silent tea-house girl, nor the swordmaster's daughter, though they are both part of who you are, but the woman who found the courage to reclaim her voice when it mattered most. When he kissed her, Akiko felt as if the final piece of herself had slotted back into place. 8 years of silence had preserved her life, protected the manuscript, kept safe the secrets her father had died to defend. But it had been finding her voice, and with it the courage to trust, to hope, to love, that had truly brought her back to life. In the years that followed, the story of the mute tea-house girl and the lonely samurai would be told throughout the provinces, how she had pretended silence for 8 years to avoid being claimed, how he had searched just as long to find her, how together they had brought justice to those who had destroyed her family. But the best parts of their story, Akiko and Hideyoshi knew, weren't found in court testimonies or imperial decrees, but in the quiet moments between them, in words spoken freely, in promises kept, in a love born from duty but sustained by choice. For Akiko had learned that there were times for silence and times for voice, and having found hers at last, she would never again let it go unheard. If you found yourself moved by this tale of courage and resilience, I hope you'll consider subscribing to hear more stories, where honor and truth prevail over darkness and silence.